Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a centralized platform to help athletes network and connect with their fellow athletes and other alumni, and also tap into various resources related to health and finance and education. But this show is all about athlete transition. It's such a major issue today between mental health, financial literacy, and we really want to make an impact. So we interview former collegiate professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sports and their journey to successful entrepreneurship and business leadership. So excited today. This is my first one now, first fighter now. I've got Cliff Starks on with me, a former MMA fighter. How you doing, Cliff?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Rob. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Cliff has an interesting background. He, in college, when he started out, he went to Mesa Community in Arizona, and he was in football and track and field, then went to Arizona State and turned into a wrestler. So we were joking about that before. So they didn't have it at Mesa, so that's why. But he was a wrestler at Arizona State, and then ultimately got into personal training, but it didn't stop there. Then he got into MMA fighting. So looks kind of crazy. You can tell us all about it. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, watched it on TV. Hopefully he didn't get too hurt. But so he did that. And then today he has Starks Enterprises, where he's the inner warrior coaching, and he'll get into all that later. He had a good explanation for it, but I gave you a 30-foot view. So Cliff, talk about growing up playing sports and how that affected you leading up into college.
Yeah. What I love most about sports, the fastest feedback loop you can ever have. You know if you're doing bad in it or if you're doing good at it. And from there, you can make adjustments. And I didn't know it was going to serve me as I went through my journey. I just knew I enjoyed winning. I enjoyed the camaraderie of it. I enjoyed learning about me, learning where I was good and where I wasn't so good, and seeing if I could get better as I went through the process.
Yeah, that's great. And did you dream about being a professional athlete? And if so, what sport?
No, I didn't dream about that at all. I was just kind of focusing on what I was doing, being very present with what I was doing. And I started getting really, really good. I'd always adjust, make changes and shifts, and I get better and better and better at it. And I love the competition of it all. I love competition. But becoming a professional athlete, it never really rang into something that I was like, oh man, I want to be a pro at this. It was more like, I really enjoy what I'm doing. And I ended up, my big thing, so rewind a little bit further back, I was an overweight kid. And so I ended up losing the weight. And in losing the weight, I wanted to support others in losing weight too. Sports just became an outlet for me. It was something that I could do because I was healthy enough to do it, and I had a lot of fun with what I was doing. But my big thing was
that's
I want
great.
people to lose weight.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I mean, that's great. I mean, it's a motivator. You're right. I mean, you see a lot of kids that, especially now. I mean, when you were growing up playing sports and me, it's a little bit different. But now with all the distractions that kids have with gaming and social media and things like that, sports is definitely a great outlet for that. So let's talk about, once you got into college, one of the things that we talk about in transitioning out of sports is, was there education? We'll fast forward to Arizona State. Was there education on talking to athletes about kind of what's next? And I don't mean just like the one-day workshop, but did they do anything there when you were there, or did they do anything today, if you know?
They didn't really talk about the transition of what's next, and that actually has me thinking I should probably start talking on that subject a little bit more. My whole thing was, I knew what I wanted to do when I got out of ASU. I wanted to get into personal training. So maybe they talked about it and I just wasn't aware that they were, but I don't really remember them saying, "Hey, what are you going to do when you're done with sports?" I don't remember exactly the statistic, but I believe it's upwards 70% that get their degree don't do something within their degree. So that's saying something. Sometimes people, they're getting into something and they don't even know why they're getting into the thing that they're getting into. I knew why I got into kinesiology though, and I knew what I wanted to do when I was going to get out.
Right. And I think it's, I was talking to on one of the podcasts, and this guy played football, I think, University of Buffalo. And he was talking about how ideally he would have had a class, like either like a 4-week workshop or a mandatory class. And I get it, especially in some of the more prominent sports, the athletes kind of are zoned in. They're just, kind of got the blinders on and probably not thinking about that. But just something I think needs to be more education, from the school doing it, and just trying to encourage athletes, again, to have that. And then even looking at the alumni athletes, like for us, we've talked about different ideas of going to athletic departments and helping with a bunch of resource partners together, developing additional curriculum or workshops, not only to help the current athletes, but a lot of times the alumni athletes get forgotten, and looking to do things like that. So let's talk about networking, connecting, and obviously it's an important thing for us and at Alumni Direct, and I know, that's how you and I met. So talk about the importance of it, especially while you're still active in the sport.
Yeah, everything comes down to community and knowing how to effectively utilize your community. There's a saying, you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And the older I get, the more I realize how important that is. Like knowing that you really are the sum of the network that you have. So it's something that you always want to be creating, and it's something you always want to be very intentional with. Not only creating, but fostering the relationships, the connections that you have with people. Like, I'll throw myself under the bus. You mentioned you wanted to connect with me, and I don't know what happened. I dropped the baton somewhere, but I ended up picking the baton back up. And I'm grateful that I got to connect with you. But it's not just having the network, but really growing the bonds in your network too. Taking the time to understand their desires, their goals, their dreams, what they want to do, what they want to accomplish, and helping one another do that. Making that a reality.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's the one thing that I always talk about a lot. And you just hit it on the head there as far as the relationship. As you build relationships, I mean, when you go out and network and connect, you shouldn't take the approach of like, hey, how are you going to, like, Cliff, what are you going to do for me today? It's more like building that relationship, and also looking at it from the flip side is like, Cliff, how can I help you? Because I think a lot of people, if you take that approach, I think the people on the other side of it really like that. They're like, wow, this person actually wants to help me. They're not just looking for something. And I think so as you build the relationships, in fact, it's interesting. I was talking to a good friend of mine that I grew up with yesterday, and he just talked about that and just building relationships over the years. And that's something that I guess in the sense of my superpower is just, continuing to connect with people and check in and see how they're doing. And yeah, I am glad that we did finally get to connect. And it shows you, it's a lot of it's perseverance too. I think you just need to, continue. If you don't get a hold of somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not interested. It could just be if you're persistent in a nice way. And even if it's not regularly, but it's someone checking in, eventually you'll have that conversation. And maybe the timing wasn't right the first time and it is the second time.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I do love about sport too. Like, you'll learn lessons and you don't even know that you're learning them. You get into a sport to have fun, but just the word you said, perseverance, the ability to keep going after what you want, because if you go after what you want, you'll learn the lesson that you need to learn. Sometimes not the lesson you want to learn, but it's the lesson that you need to learn. But yeah, the perseverance to building healthy bonds and healthy relationships with others, there's nothing more powerful than it. If I could tell any of the youth, I'd say build that skill set, because it's the most powerful skill set that you're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like I was talking to a couple kids in college, freshman, sophomore athletes, and I asked them about networking, connecting, and they just said they wish they would have learned more about it. I mean, they're still young, but because if you think even back to high school, I mean, you're going to have friends, and obviously at some point you're all growing up, and eventually reaching back to them or potentially their parents or coaches. And just I guess be open to building the relationships, the key to all that. So let's talk about alumni engagement. And this is something obviously all part of Alumni Direct in our community center. So when you were at school, was there efforts to bring athletes back across all sports and to have them working with the current athletes or even the alumni athletes?
Yeah, so at ASU, we have something called the Sun Kissed, and we would not only work with up and coming athletes, we would work with the youth, and so many learning experiences from working with youth. One, don't tell them what not to do, because they'll definitely do that. Even sometimes won't even do it on purpose. You just put it into their head. That's a subconscious thing. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but you learn how to be a very clear coach and a very effective coach, because you have to keep it really, really simple for kids. And that's a beautiful thing, because the truth is you got to keep it simple for adults too. Adults have all sorts of, they are thinking about so many different things that making something overly complicated just adds extra pressure and stress into their life. So when you can simplify things, it makes it easier on both ends.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's, the whole alumni engagement thing, it's a two-way street, obviously. So, I mean, this school, it's great that they have that program at ASU, and there's a couple other schools I've been learn about. Some schools too, they might have something, but it might not be as effective. And I think there's various reasons. One thing could be that, I mean, obviously the school is focusing on the current athletes, but there's a lot of value to the alumni athletes. And alumni athletes need help too. And I think it would be great to encourage the help. But, sometimes it might be as simple as like the athletic director change or the coaches change or whatever. But it's good that they're doing that program, and hopefully that continues to grow. And it's great that they're working with that you're working with youth too. And then I guess, so it sounds like do they have anything alumni related for athletes? Like, for the ones that have already gone there?
Yeah,
Like
there's a
areas to
couple
help
of
them?
alumni related things. We usually go back to support other ASU wrestlers as they're going through their journey. And I know some of our guys have actually become motivational speakers. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure, I actually am thinking of putting my hat into that. But speaking future comers of ASU, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I always add, this is my new twist that I keep saying, it's probably now I'm about 15 shows in of doing it, but what advice would you give to freshman Cliff in college?
I don't know if freshman Cliff would have listened to me even if I did give him advice. I'd probably try and
So that's
catch
the
him in
first
high
advice.
school.
That's the first thing, right? Cliff, listen to me.
Yeah. I'd probably try and catch him in high school right before he got into college, just because he's thinking about too much in college. But what I would say is document everything. One thing I focus on is living my wildest dreams, and I've obtained many of those dreams, and I'm looking to obtain more of them. And the most important thing is you getting it, but you actually showing others how to get it. That's what I love about the inner warrior coaching that I do, is I have a framework now, and I thought I had the framework before, but I didn't. And it's because I didn't document it, because I didn't think to document it. I was just thinking I'm going to live a life worth living. And that's what I focused on doing.
Okay, now fast forward. What advice would you give the senior Cliff?
Let's see. There's an acronym for FAIL, and it's called First Attempt in Learning. I switched the acronym up to First Attempt in Leverage. Figure out where your leverage is at. Figure out how, if you want to do something, how do you do it in a shorter amount of time? How do you do it faster? How do you do it easier? How do you use your leverage points so that life is aligned and working for you?
I like that one. That's great. We're definitely got to coin that one. You got to coin it, and we got to put it out there.
Awesome.
So
I love
let's talk now about, let's talk about the transition out of sports. So we're going to cover two with you, because first you had your, you wrestled in college, and now you're transitioning out, getting physical therapy. And then we'll talk about, after that, we'll talk about your second one with the MMA fighting. So talk about, was it, you played sports, you've wrestled your whole life. Were there challenges when you were done?
Challenges on like injuries, on the transition itself. Like what kind of challenges?
The transition itself, just,
The
kind of
transition
like just
itself.
mindset. I mean, some people don't have any issues with it, and some have a lot.
I liked where I was at from the transition. Now, there were certain things that I didn't know that I know now, but if you don't know, then you don't know. So I'll give you an example. I didn't realize how powerful effective selling could be as a personal trainer, because we weren't taught how to effectively sell. We were taught how to train people. The only problem is, well, if you don't sell them, then it makes it harder to train them. And going through that process, I liked what I was, because I thought sales was something that I couldn't do or wouldn't do. And I was just a trainer, and I focused on being just a trainer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And it leads a little bit to one thing that we talk about is that the athlete skill set, and just, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, but just the importance of that, and that people want to hire athletes, or, people want to work with athletes. And just, unfortunately, with the transition out of sports, sometimes depending on how ingrained they were, and maybe aspirations of being a professional athlete and all that, the athletes identify as the sport and not the person, and has a long way to go. So it's important for all you athletes out there is that you do have that skill set. And I'm sure, just like even the sales side that you're talking about, being in sports, you're a leader, and you probably had that innate skill set of sales and putting the best Cliff forward. It just, like you said, at that point, you didn't necessarily think about it.
Yeah. Like when you're getting out on the field, you're selling yourself and yourself, but you never really think to sell other people. You only think of, and this was from my perspective, my journey. I've sold myself on myself a lot of times. I've had to bet on myself a lot of times. And I didn't realize the beauty of, I'm just helping people bet on themselves when I'm selling them something. It's not something that I'm doing to them. It's something I'm doing for them. And that comes from new conditionings, new learnings. But that was a future Cliff. That wasn't the right out of college Cliff who loved being a personal trainer. And I love being a personal trainer, because I'm constantly getting people fit. in their mind. That's what I'm always doing. And you look back and you go, oh crap, I was teaching this, or I was teaching this, or I was doing this. The most important thing is how we think about something. We can change our entire lives doing that.
Yeah, yeah. So you're into physical therapy, learning different aspects of that, and then I guess what got you into MMA fighting? And talk a little about that.
Because I'm crazy as hell. I like competition. It's fun to me. So, because I was working at an all-women's gym, I had a bunch of people, don't do it. It's not easy. And it wasn't. But wow, the learning lessons in that. Like the ability to speak a different language, ask different questions, figure things out in a different way. And you go, you know what? Why don't I just raise the ante on my challenges of life? What would be one of the most challenging things I could do? And I thought, oh, stepping in a cage with someone my own weight and skill and ability, that would be fun. And so Crazy Cliff was at it again. He strikes again. He goes after a big dream, accomplishes a dream, and then goes after another big one. That was just the one on the list. I'm like, let's give it a try.
How long did you do it for?
7 years. I still had 2 more years left in me.
What's the average of an MMA fighter?
I don't know the exact average. I just know around 9 to 10 years. And I just happen to see this pattern. They start falling off either because of injury, because of too much brain trauma, because of a list of things. I'm not a scientist on it by any means, but I wanted 9 years total. And I ended up stopping at 7 years because I had my son and the priorities just shifted for me.
Yeah. And I think that's the case with it, like really anything that you're doing. So how was the transition out of that?
So hard. Yeah, I got into the business world. I thought the business world was a lot easier than people make it out to sound. Where they're like, oh yeah, you just push this button and you get to 7 figures and you go take care of your friends, your family, your community. And I quickly realized it wasn't that at all. A new set of skills, a new set of learning lessons. And here we go. Though my why always keeps me in the game. By the way, my why always keeps me in the game.
That's good. Yeah, that's important. You hear that across a lot of different areas. So what advice, a couple words of advice would you give to athletes as they get ready to transition out of sports, whether it's out of, from college or professional or even, high school for that matter?
Respect to you for playing athletics. You already know the lessons because you've applied the lessons in one thing. Now it's about figuring out how to apply the lessons in another thing. So what I mean by that, having the right coaching, having the right mentorship, practicing the right skill sets, and knowing the skill sets worth practicing for you. We're all genetically different. So we all have different skill sets that we just naturally gravitate to. Knowing yourself is the most important piece of the game. When you know yourself, you have a chance. If you don't know yourself, life can get really, really challenging.
It's amazing because each episode, you always get so much out of it. Even when I listen back to them, it's just the different advice. That's great. You hear all different things and they're all, it's a different angle from each athlete. But I think it's so important. And as we, hopefully get in front of more people with this and they just see just every week, just the great information that comes out and really helps people out. So let's talk today. So you've got Starks Enterprises. Tell us about what you're doing there. And since I kind of gave the 30 from the Inner Warrior coaching, now you can get into the whole thing and tell us all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Inner Warrior is about freedom at the end of the day. Because ultimately, isn't that what everybody wants? Some form of freedom. And so what I focus on is helping people get fit in their mind, in their heart, and in their skill set. The way they think mentally, the way they feel about what they're doing, and the skill sets they're acquiring along the way so that they can live the life that they want to live and not have to worry about unnecessary struggle and challenges.
And do you do now, are you still doing like the training, like physical training too, or is it just more about the mental approach?
So, and that's a good question. The way I look at it is I have a customized process. I think things should be customized. And depending on the individual, I'm going to support them in that aspect. So I'll give you an example. When I got out of sports and I got into entrepreneurship, I started neglecting my workouts. I massively neglected my workouts because I felt, well, I don't have time to work out. I got to do this thing and this thing and this thing over here. And it was actually making me more sluggish. It was making it harder to actually build the traction that I needed to build. And so if I was talking to me, someone like me, I'd figure out what that schedule was and what's going on and why things aren't working. because it's just as important on what you're not doing as what you are doing. And so I won't necessarily create a workout program for somebody, but I will look at their routine. And if there's no physical component, no component where they're actually moving their body, getting themselves ready, I'm going to point it out and say, hey, do you think if you were to start walking, this would make this part over here easier?
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you think being an athlete helps you as an entrepreneur?
That one word that you used, perseverance, earlier on, because life's going to give you what it gives you. And just like a great surfer doesn't become a great surfer the first time they try and ride a wave, they become great from figuring out time, timing, positioning, and how to get things working fluidly and flowing with function. But you only do that because you have the perseverance to keep attempting at it in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. Are you working just individually in your area, or is it something just kind of more, I guess now with everything being remote, more of like a national scope?
National. Yeah. So I do online stuff, and I also created something called the training room, because I've realized how important it is to intentionally get the reps in to getting to where you want to go in your life.
How does that work, the training room?
Yeah, the training room's an online process where I ask a question to everybody. I share a story, I share a challenge, and I also share the solution that I got from the story and an exercise. And then I ask a question and I have everybody play together. And what I mean by play together is when we participate in our own life, we start acquiring the skill sets. If we go to like a boardroom meeting and we're just being talked at, and then we go home, we haven't acquired anything. We haven't learned anything. It's like a personal trainer, you watching the personal trainer doing the push-ups and the sit-ups and the pull-ups, and then saying like, all right, you go home and go do the same thing that I just did. It's not going to work.
Definitely not. Cliff did it great. He was like the push-ups. He got 100 in.
Yeah.
I did 3. I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know where we're done. So tell people how they can find you. And this is old school. We'll put it in the show notes and all that too.
Yeah. So you can find me on Facebook Messenger or LinkedIn. Just reach out. Also, if you mention that you listen to this podcast, I will provide you an archetype quiz so that you can see, are you a fighter? Are you a warrior? Are you adaptive? Or are you a civilian?
There you go. You heard it here first. Thank you. Appreciate that. And everybody's got to definitely check out Cliff and check out his inner warrior training. It sounds awesome. And we'll look for you on that stage sometime too, as you get into the speaking circuit. I know a lot of people that I've talked to, want to get into that. So I'm sure you'll have fun with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. And audience, appreciate you for listening.
Yeah. And you can find us at Alumni Direct. And if you go to our YouTube channel, that's where you can find this podcast, Athletes, Entrepreneurs, Alumni Journey. You can also find us across all the different podcast networks. And it's such a powerful show. And Cliff, I mean, even if we help one person, but hopefully it's a lot more. I mean, I think there's so much value that you provided today, and then our other athletes podcasts that we've had prior and the ones we'll have in the future. So thank you again, everybody, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.